Hello and welcome back to War of the Yokai, Book 5. This is Part 3. Trying to think if there's any relevant information to pass on. Nope, let's hop into it. September 24th started like any other Friday for Hyoka Kagari. She woke up, put on her yokai crystal, wiped the snow dust from her eyes, entered the living room, and turned on the TV. Normally, she would have done this in her own home, but today was different. God. Bethany always does this right when I start. But today was different. Today was her wedding, and so she'd spent the night with Sarah in the Banshee's garden quarters in order to make travel in the morning a little easier. In fact, everyone had paired off for today. Usako and Emiko were already living together in the upstairs penthouse at Usako's apartment building, while Nonami slept on Hitomi and Rei's downstairs sofa, after pushing a tall bookcase against the small window to block out the sun. She had hardly gotten any sleep that night, though, due to certain noises emanating from the Kobayashi's bedroom until late into the evening, much to the vampire's chagrin. Hyoka was in the living room early that morning, watching the morning news, when Sarah shambled her way through the bedroom door, barely wearing a robe, looking quite bedraggled. Despite being a spirit, for whom sleep was a suggestion rather than a requirement, going for a long time without rest or energy absorption wasn't healthy for her. The reason for her state? She'd been up all night working on a massive gunpla kit and had devoted far more energy to it than intended. Sarah! Cried Hyoka upon seeing the Banshee's state. Please tell me you can dress up in time for the wedding, right? And can you, please put something more on? I can see your boobs. With a swipe of her hand and a yawn, Sarah levitated over a t-shirt, quickly tossing off her robe and pulling the shirt on in the course of about 2 seconds. Fortunately for Hyoka, who was staring at the floor as a heavy blue blush of embarrassment crossed her cheeks, Sarah had at least remembered to wear panties. This time. Geez, Sarah. Anyway, yeah, please juice up, okay? It's the big day. I know, she grumbled, moseying over to the television and placing her hand on the screen. The picture flickered and glitched as energy flowed from it into Sarah's ethereal form. The rings around Sarah's eyes vanished, and the sagging hunch of her back straightened up. After about 30 seconds, she pulled her hand away and sighed contentedly. Contently. Ah, much better, she smiled. Sorry if I gave you a scare there, Hyoka. Give me a few minutes to gather my things and I'll be ready. Sighing as well, in relief, the Yukiona stood up, grabbed her own purse, and made her way to the door. Once the two spectral women were ready, they headed out the door and towards Tsushima Park. About a quarter-mile away, Usako was also just awakening. She had been up late as well, though not nearly as late as Sarah had. Mostly because she genuinely couldn't sleep. Not with everything she'd been told by her own future daughter just a few hours before. It terrified her to think she was capable of the awful things Misato had described. But the more she thought about it, the more Usako wondered about other things. Misato hadn't known or recognized Hyoka. That had been clear from her initial reaction. According to Misato, the catalyst for Usako's own despotic rise was her failure to revive Kuriko, an event that happened long after she'd met her frosty friend. It was possible, sure, that perhaps something in between now and Misato's birth could have estranged Hyoka from the team in some manner, but even then... And then there was the mention of a visit to Camelot that would have occurred when Usako and the team had been on Kaiju Island. Perhaps, thought Usuko, when Masato traveled back in time, it sent ripples into the time stream that altered events? Or, mused the pink cat humorlessly, maybe she'd been caught in a lie. She'd already admitted to one lie, that being the false name she'd given Emiko when the two had met several months prior. It had been at that point, around 2 a.m. or so, that Usuko had nodded off to sleep. It was now 9:30 a.m., and she could feel Emiko stirring next to her in bed. The Oni had likely been awoken either by the change in Usuko's breathing, which her heightened Oni senses detected, or by the accidental sharp kick Usuko had let off into Emiko's butt as she had jerked awake. Thinking about it, Usuko wagered it was probably the second one. Uso-chan, growled Emiko, her pale blue Oni hand reaching out blindly towards her girlfriend. What the hell was that for? Sorry, Emi-chan, replied Usuko with a big yawn. I think I was having a nightmare. Leaning over, she planted a kiss on Emiko's cheek. It was funny, she thought, how just about a year ago now she'd been absolutely terrified of the entity she now slept next to almost every night anymore. Love sure had a funny way of changing one's perspectives. Speaking of love, it took Usuko a moment more to remember the date, and when she did, she practically sprang out of bed. The wedding! She yelped. Isn't until 2, grunted Emiko, finishing Usuko's sentence and pulling the blankets a little tighter over herself. As long as we leave by noon, we should be fine. Oh, I said that a little aggressively. Let me reread that. As long as we leave by noon, we should be fine. There we go. Oh, yeah, said Usuko, relaxing a bit and settling back in. Hey, Emi-chan, can we talk for a bit? About, I don't know, about us? Emiko stirred once more, turning over and facing Usuko. Sure, Uso-chan, she said, a faint hint of worry in her tone. Is everything all right? Oh, yeah, no, it isn't that talk, said Usuko, giving Emi a small smile, her expression then turning more serious. It's about... I guess I was just wondering, like, do you see kids in your future? Now fully awake, Emiko pushed herself upright in the bed, leaning against her elbow. I mean, I suppose so, she replied. I'm heir apparent to the throne, as father doesn't wish to cede it to my elder sister. They never have liked each other. I've always known kids were in my future, one way or another. Why do you ask? What brought this on? It's hard to explain, Emiko, but you know that girl from last night? The one you know as Megami? I do. An odd one, her. So familiar to me, yet I just cannot place her. Well, she is our daughter from the future. Let's try that again. Well, she's our daughter from the future. Emiko blinked, then blinked again. The only thing keeping her from laughing outright was the intensely serious look on Usuko's face. Knowing Emiko was as unlikely to believe the statement as Usuko had been, she produced the photos Masato had given her and handed them to Emiko. After a moment or two of staring, especially at the second one, Emiko's face turned almost magenta. But that isn't... No, what? That isn't how this works! She cried while making particular hand motions. We're both cis girls. I know that. I know this for a fact. How could we have had a kid? Unless... is there a spell for a magic Emmy! Jesus, Emiko, no! Sorry. Both girls sat there awkwardly for a moment, blushing heavily. Finally, Emiko broke the tension by speaking again. So what then? Is she a
clone?
Kinda, replied Usuko. I don't really understand it, but I think so. Made from both our DNA. Anyway, that's not the only thing, Emmy. There's more, but I need you to brace yourself, okay? This is gonna this is probably definitely gonna hurt. Usuko went on to explain everything Masato had spoken to her about the night before, of Usuko's evil alter self, her rise to power, every last detail she could. When she was done, Emiko's face was ashen, and her expression was one of fearful disbelief.
Usuko, surely you can't believe all that? She asked quietly. That's... I don't even have words.
Usuko reached over and placed her hands on top of Emiko's and stared, her dead in the eyes. Her own expression was grim, but determined. When she spoke, her voice was trembling. Emiko, I need you to promise me something, okay? If I start going down that path, if I start trying to accumulate power like that, I want you to stop me by whatever means necessary. Even if it means I have to die. Okay? Promise me.
I don't know if I can, Usuko, replied Emmy in halting tones. Well, of course I do anything and everything possible to save you. That goes without saying, but I can't kill you, Usuko. No matter whatever happens, I just can't. Besides, she continued a moment later, getting out of bed, shifting to human form, and sliding on a pair of slippers, it won't happen. I'm sure of it. Things are already different. I mean, look at the first photo, if nothing else. We're all wearing red Tsukiyomi uniforms when ours are purple. The pinkette hadn't noticed it the first time around, but Emiko was right. Not only were they all wearing the school uniform for some reason, but it was red with a black ribbon and a black skirt. Tsukuyomi high school uniforms had been purple blazers, black neckties, with gray skirts for as long as the school had existed. Most strange, though perhaps Misato's transport back into the past caused more ripples than she thought. Usuko knew she'd have to look into the effects of past walking at a later date, as she definitely wouldn't be able to today due to the wedding. Dawn. Joy. Nonami laid on the sofa, tired-eyed and wearing an oversized shirt she'd borrowed from Ray the night before to sleep in. She'd hardly gotten any rest whatsoever, either due to the discomfort of the sofa or the animalistic noises that had carried through the home's ventilation system throughout the night. Nonami had gone up around 1 a.m. to ask the two women to quiet down and had gotten more of an eyeful than she'd ever wanted to see. She desperately wished she could scrub the memory from her brain. No, it's not what you're thinking. Okay, yes it is. Regardless, they had stopped. Whether out of embarrassment or respect for Nonami, the vampire cared not, and she'd tried her hardest to get some sleep, but it wasn't easy. The sofa wasn't enclosed, it didn't have her native soil, and there had been a faint ticking sound from an analog clock on one of the walls. And there had been a faint ticking sound from an analog clock on one of the walls. Had been. Try as she might, Nonami couldn't manage more than a few minutes of true sleep at a time, settling instead for the slight rest. Settling instead for the slight rest merely keeping her eyes closed and her body still would allow. Now it was morning, and she felt as though she'd been hit by an 18-wheeler. Nonami Isekai Wen. From upstairs, she could hear Ray stumble out of bed and collide with a wall, which prompted a small yet tired giggle out of Nonami. She could always count on Kobayashi-kun to find some way of clutching up. Thinking back, she recalled when she'd first met Ray back when the Red Oni was around 10 or so. She'd always bring lunches to her brother, Tetsuo Kobayashi, one of Nonami's then teammates. Even back then, the little Oni had clear markings of real strength, lifting heavy obstacles out of her way that might have even given fully grown Oni a hard time on their own. Apparently, as a child, she had been quite sick and weak, but had since recovered and wanted to prove to the world she was just as tough as her siblings. She still had the same braid she did now, a marking of the warrior class in her clan, but her hair was quite long. She loved her long hair because her friend Hitomi loved it too. Briefly, Nonami realized that Ray had cut it short just after the two's initial breakup. She'd never really put two and two together, but thinking back, it made more sense. Ray had been partnered with Nonami for about a year before the two would meet Usuko, and at first the vampire had her reservations. Sure, Ray was strong, but she was also easily distracted and prone to bouts of melancholy due to said recent breakup. Then came the day the two of them had to fight 3 Takumas on their own. The purple man-eating beasts were tough, but when one nearly gulped Nonami down, Ray's true power showed itself. The fierce rage and fiercer loyalty to her friend struck Nonami, and the rest was history. Her internal musings done, Nonami placed her yokai crystal around her neck and shifted back into human form. She did this not because she had to, but because of the open floor plan of Hitomi's house allowed in so much sunlight that it was more or less a death sentence otherwise. Passing the remains of a clock rendered into its component parts by an angry vampire, Nonami began making her way upstairs. Good morning, Kobayashi-kun, yawned Nonami as she rounded the staircase to the main floor. I trust you two slept well?
Yes, we did, replied Ray in Oni form, awkwardly as she was fixing breakfast. Sorry about that. Thursday nights are like Hitomi's, Anyway, there's like a pack of blood on the top shelf of the fridge ready to go. Anything else I can get you?
No, Kobayashi-kun, thank you, smiled Nonami, walking over and taking the blood from the refrigerator. I appreciate you having this for me. Be negative. You know my favorite.
I'd hope so,
giggled Ray as she finished dicing the meat she'd been working on and tossed it into the wok.
We've been close friends for a little over 3 years now.
Wait a second. Yeah. Wait. Did I just plot hole? No, you know what? I can allow that. Just because they were teamed up a year ago doesn't mean they didn't know each other previously. Anyway, sorry. I should have paused. I should have paused the recording there. Sorry.
We've been close friends for a little over 3 years now. If I didn't at least know your favorite blood type, what kind of Oni would I be?
As she began sipping the blood through a straw poked through the side like a gruesome Capri Sun, Hitomi came into the kitchen and twirled her wife's hair with her finger. The two were so clearly in love, and it did Nonami's heart good to see such romance blossom. Can I, ask a question? Inquired Hitomi after she unlatched from Ray and sat down next to Nonami. I was wondering, does blood taste different for you? Because for me it tastes all metally and gross. I couldn't imagine drinking it all the time. Oh, sorry, was that rude? Perhaps if you were in different company, but I take no offense, smiled Nonami with a knowing chuckle. I'm somewhat used to it with Ray. Oh, wait, no. I'm somewhat used to it with Usuko. To answer your question, it does have a metallic taste. However, it's one that is quite appealing to my kind. Different blood types have their own distinct flavors, and differing lifestyles can also affect the flavor. Tell me, Hitomi, what is your blood type? AB, I think, replied Hitomi Kobayashi, twirling her violet locks absent-mindedly. Then your blood would have a taste comparable to saltier foods.
stated Nonami. Of course, given your diet, it would also likely have a robust flavor as well, considering the amount of protein you consume. Like a well-cooked steak.
Huh, so you're so you're as much of a delicacy as you look, Hitomi, giggled Ray suggestively. Like I saw that coming.
And sip. It was 12:30 p.m. by the time everyone arrived at Tsushima Park, Usuko and Emiko being the last to make it. Their tardiness wasn't due to the pinkette for once. Rather, it had been Emiko's fault, as the Oni had gotten stuck in line at a convenience store along the way to pick up a card for Hyoka and Junji. When they arrived, they found Hyoka worked into an absolute panicked tizzy as Sarah and Nonami tried to calm her down. The large pavilion structure in the park center had been decorated with many streamers and balloons. A long red carpet rolled down its center to a wooden pulpit that had been set up. The tables had all been removed, replaced with several rows of folding chairs, and 4 large makeshift changing rooms had been set up. In reality, they were Gardner disaster response trailers, but Lydia had loaned them to Hyoka for the day. They weren't too far from the carpet, and their doors opened right onto it. It's just an old wives' tale, insisted Sarah, as Nonami nodded sagely in agreement. You got nothing to worry about, Hyoka. Truthfully. Huh? What's going on? Asked Usuko, concerned for her friend. She caught a glimpse of Junji about 10 minutes ago in the men's trailer, and now she's ready to call the whole thing off due to superstition, answered Nonami with a sigh. According to legend, it's very bad luck for the bride or groom to see the other on their wedding day before the ceremony. Personally, I think she's just overreacting a tad. I don't want to risk it! I don't want to risk it! Cried Hyoka, still in her street clothes and sitting in a patch of frosty grass, despite the currently nearly 80-degree temperatures. Today has to be perfect. If anything went wrong, Usuko knelt down and placed a hand on Hyoka's shoulder. The Yukiono was even colder to the touch than normal, a result of her current panic. Hey, Yo-Yo, it's gonna be fine, said Usuko reassuringly. You know how I know? I had a vision last night, and in it, today went off without a hitch. Alright? You gonna be okay? Hyoka seemed to be mulling it over for a moment, before standing up and dusting herself off. Yeah, I think so, she replied hesitantly. Did you really have a vision, though, Usuko? Of course, lied Usuko. Yep, just before I woke up. Now, why don't you go get changed, all right? We want to make sure everything is ready to go. With the matter settled, at least for now, the group each went off onto their I don't know why the word on is there. Each went off to their respective trailers. Ray, Hyoka, and Sarah were in one, specifically so the Red Oni would have as much room as possible to change in. Usuko, Nonami, and Emiko, meanwhile, were in the other women's trailer. Both trailers had been large enough that each girl could have plenty of privacy while they dressed, and they were air-conditioned to boot. Once the latter group was dressed, they made their way over to Hyoka's trailer to wait until the ceremony would begin. As the minutes rolled by into an hour, the first guests began to arrive, starting with none other than the Nekomotos. Claire and Carrie were to be the flower girl and ring bearer, respectively, and were dressed quite adorably for the part in matching pastel purple dresses, complete with sunbonnets to hide their feline ears. As they were still quite young, they didn't have nearly as much practice keeping them down at all times, thus necessitating the bonnets. Cecily wore a slim but modest teal dress and black knee-length boots, while Lydia stuck with the same black dress she'd worn in the medal ceremony back in January. Actually, considering she's pregnant, that doesn't make any sense, but oh well. Moving on. Next to arrive were a few people Usako didn't recognize, but Hyoka explained were a few of her online friends who lived nearby and came to see her. Next was a group of men, all more or less dressed in the same white shirt and blue-green slacks. They were Junji's old computer club mates from his high school days. Next were the Pendragon siblings, Madrid, who was to be the officiant of the ceremony, and Mordred, who came along simply for the experience. After that, several more faces floated in, including Hitomi, Sakura, Christina, and one large, hairy, Russian-looking man who seemed quite perplexed by the situation and who sat rather far back from everyone. "Is that Gohan?" asked Usako in astonishment. "Wow, I didn't know a yokai crystal could work on a Yeti. That's so cool!" "I'm just glad he could make it," whispered Hyoka as she looked out on the assembled group with a few tears in her eyes. She then turned back to them. "All of you, thank you so much. I know we didn't get off on the right foot last December, but I wanted to say thank you for everything." She turned to each girl, addressing them in turn. "Usako, for being my only friend when I had none. For giving me a name when I couldn't remember mine. Ray, for giving me the courage to believe in myself when I couldn't back on Kaiju Island. Emiko, for taking me to Nazunayuki and helping me learn more of myself from Ms. Hayasaka. Nonami, for trusting in me, despite my initial actions towards Sarah. And Sarah, for being the mother I always needed and never had. For helping me regain my memories. For being my best friend. I never imagined I'd be walking down the aisle, let alone as a bride. Let alone with so many friends to stand up at the altar with me. Thank you, everyone. I'll always remember this moment. I love you all so much." There wasn't a single dry eye in that trailer once Hyoka had finished speaking, and Usako was the first to embrace Hyoka in a strong hug, the rest of the team quickly following suit. There wasn't a need for words. Everything that needed to be said had been, or was expressed on each of their faces. Before, they had been a unit, a team, brought together by circumstance or choice. Now they were something more, and far, far greater. Now they were a family. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God to unite these two in holy matrimony." Mordred looked positively regal, stood at the pulpit, wearing the garb of a woman of the cloth. She had volunteered for the position, as being the head of Gardena and the descendant of King Arthur, she had the authority to perform this ceremony. Hyoka, for her part, looked very much like the snow princess she'd hoped she would. The light from the sun caught the rhinestones in her dress and refracted the light into tiny rainbows that danced along the white and pale blue of her dress. Complete with snowflake earrings and a bit of blue lipstick, she could almost have been mistaken for an Elsa cosplayer. To her right stood Usako, the maid of honor, Sarah, her matron, and the rest as bridesmaids. Together, they almost appeared to be another rainbow themselves. Mordred continued her reading the Prelude to the Vows. As Mordred continued reading the Prelude to the Vows, Usako took a look past the crowd. She was feeling something approaching. She'd felt it earlier when Hyoka stumbled halfway down the aisle. There's a lot of typos here, sorry. And the Pinkette, thinking fast, quickly stopped time and set her back up. She'd seen a figure standing out near the trees, but couldn't make anything out than a flash of red before she had to continue the flow of time and get back in position. So basically, Usako said, "Zawardo!" Sorry. Now, though, she saw the figure again. Closer now. It looked like herself, only a year or so younger and wearing a red version of her school uniform. This other Usako seemed to be staying back for now, as if waiting for something. When Usako quickly rubbed her eyes, the figure was gone. Must be my imagination playing tricks on me, she mused internally. Before the reciting of the rings, Hyoka, I believe you have something you wish to say? The Yuki-onna nodded and looked her beloved in the eyes.
Junji, we've known each other for so long. You've always been the one constant in my life. Even when we were kids in school, you were always there for me. My rock, my light in the blizzard. Today, stood before all our friends, before everyone, I want you to know I love you, forever and always, and beyond even death itself.
Well said, smiled Mildred. Usako was starting to get really anxious now. She could sense something was about to happen, but she was not about to interrupt the ceremony on the off chance she was wrong. Instead, she subtly nudged Nonami and poked at the talisman she'd obtained on Kaiju Island, which she now wore as a bracelet. Knowing Usako wouldn't do this if it weren't important, Nonami subtly palmed the talisman as Junji gave his own vows.
Nonami, I know you can't reply, but there's something coming, she said telepathically. A few life energies from the south, and as weird as it is to say, I think one of them is mine.
Nonami's eyes widened, and Usako continued.
I saw a weird sort of alternate version of myself out near the trees a bit ago. I know it sounds weird, but we should prepare for an attack, I think.
So quickly, no one else would have noticed it. Nonami nodded and unpalmed her talisman, slipping it to Usako.
You're certain of this? Without a doubt?
Usako also nodded.
Pass it down the line. I will inform the rest.
Usako did as asked, handing the talisman fast off to Sarah, who received the message, Possible attack imminent. Be prepared in case. Pass back. From there, Nonami then passed it down to Emiko, who then passed it to Rei. By the time the rings had been exchanged, the whole team, save Hyoka, knew of the danger. Well, by the power invested in me, I hereby declare you two married. You are forevermore Mr. and Mrs. Hyoka Kaguri. You may kiss. It was at that moment all hell broke loose in Tsushima Park. It felt and looked as though the horror shelf at a rental store had come to life in the middle of the park. Standing there, eyeing the procession almost hungrily, were monsters and murderers from several films and stories you might know, as well as two frighteningly familiar faces. Emiko's Oni form, as deranged as she'd looked that first night Usako had seen it. The other was the red-uniformed Usako, a spiteful grin etched across her face.
Is that Teddy Luger?
Asked Rei, as her and the others fell into combat stances between the guests and the line of what could only be tulpas. There had to be at least 10 there, all ones that had been previously spotted in Fumizaki, as well as 3 new ones. A 2-headed grizzly bear 3 times the size of your average one. What could only be described as a dragon-bone colossus, and a member of the Canadian Mounted Police. What? All right, just 10 of them, stated Nonami. Mordred, you two work on getting the civilians to safety. Everyone else, pick your targets and go. Summoning her Quakebreaker, Nonami charged at the tulpa Dracula and speared him easily. He was apparently having great difficulty operating in the sunlight, and so had proven no match for her even in human form.
"Don't you ever think of impersonating my cousin ever again," she growled.
Ray, meanwhile, was engaged with two of the tulpas at once. While one attempted to use his machete to swipe at her, though to no real effect, as her oni hide was tough enough to reflect most of the blows, the other took pot-shot slashes with his knife hand. These had more effect, as his movements were much faster than his companion, and his blades were much sharper.
Strange that they resorted to reusing these,
stated Nonami as she rushed to aid Ray, also having dealt with the Frankenstein tulpa just as easily. Clearly, the bear and the mountie are from Madrid and Cecily's spheres, respectively. But the thing made of bones, I don't know. Combining their elemental powers to make lava, the pair finished off their foes, and moved on to the bone colossus, circling it as Sarah and Gohan joined them. The Yeti was enraged, though more in control of himself than he had been before, no doubt a result of his and Junji's bonding. With the four working together, it didn't take long for the colossus to be dismantled. In the background, Hyoka sat on the floor in a stupor, unable to process what was happening. This wasn't supposed to happen. Why now? Why did this stuff always have to happen to her? Why couldn't she just be a normal girl? With as mighty a bellow as the always quiet Hyoka's voice was capable of, she changed over to her spirit form as a freezing gale enveloped the park. The temperatures dipped to near zero in seconds, and the grass turned to ice. Okay, I gotta get a drink for this. Okay. It's not fair! I'm sorry, that's the best I can do. She shouted, snow and ice raining from the sky. Unfortunately, no one was able to reply at the moment, as her friends were too busy dealing with threats of their own. Usuko dodged a shot from a crossbow held by her other self, using the same black-haired form Usuko had the day Kuriko had been kidnapped and Nonami got run through. This other Usuko laughed in amusement as her counterpart dodged the powerful magical blasts, replying to them with volleys from her shotgun that seemed to just bounce harmlessly off her double. You know, I'd rather forgotten how temperamental I used to be, laughed alternate Usuko. Come on, Usuko, really show me what you can do. I hear you're more an angel than a dweller this time around. Is that right? She cackled and brought her own bat out, only looked far different than Usuko's. Runes and inscriptions had been carved into it, and it glowed a sickly, ephemeral greenish-black. Look, we both know you're just a tulpa, so just shut up and die, shouted Usuko, swinging wildly in a rage. She was pissed off, both at whoever had created this admittedly lifelike tulpa, and who this tulpa represented, the evil version of herself from Misato's future. A tulpa? Is that right? She laughed again. You truly don't understand what's going on, do you? Perhaps you need another lesson. Altsuko, yes, that's intentional. Altsuko unfurled her ebon wings and created a powerful gust of wind, which sent Usuko careening into the ground. Without hesitation or mercy, she swung her bat and landed a powerful, crunching blow to Usuko's right arm, shattering every bone in it instantly. Usuko couldn't help but let out an agonized, blood-curdling scream as her right arm was essentially reduced to a useless sack of meat. You're still so weak, Usuko, called Altsuko mockingly. To think I used to be you. I suppose it's only a matter of time, Usuko dear. You'll grow into your proper role eventually. For now, though, I'll see you around the next time you look in the mirror. She continued to laugh even as she walked away, back into the tree line from whence she'd came, and vanished, leaving Usuko curled on the ground and whimpering. Emiko
was in the middle of a true nightmare, once more facing a demon from her past. Only this time it was quite literal.
You might have the rest of these fools believing you, but deep down you know the truth.
It snarled, uprooting a tree and hurling it at high speed towards Emiko.
Those nanobots, the ones who made me, they don't create thoughts. They only amplify what's already there.
Shut up! Snapped Emiko, transforming to Shutendoji form, grabbing her Tulpa double and swinging her around before sending her flying into the ground. The thing wearing her face laughed and laughed as it got up and dusted itself off.
You know what I think? The only reason you ever warmed up to Usuko is because you realized she isn't human. If she was, you'd have never told her you loved her. Why would you love something inferior to you, after all?
She's not! Roared Emiko, summoning her electro hammer and slamming it with all her Oni might into the side of the Tulpa's skull. Its head nearly fell to pieces, but quickly managed to regenerate. Mostly. Now it had shards of shattered jawbone sticking out through half-formed skin. A good portion of the right side of its face was nothing but exposed bone with some ligament. Okay, I need to get a drink before I read this part. And volume warning.
She's my Usuko! My Usuko!
If I don't get a noise complaint, I will be shocked. Emiko continued to beat the thing as it lay there on the ground, laughing and laughing until it physically couldn't laugh anymore from the sheer damage Emiko's rage had done to it. By the time she was through, before it faded to nothing, the Tulpa's body was more like a blue smear on the ground. Emiko heard Usuko's cry then, and rushed over to where the Pinkette was holding her severely broken and mangled arm limply at an unnatural angle. Madrid had been successful in getting the rest of the civilians away, and had gone back to the scene of the conflict to render what aid she could. As she arrived, the first thing she noticed was Hyoka's impromptu Elsa moment, and second was Lydia locked in a struggle with what looked to be Elmi? Had she escaped, or...
I'm surprised to see you again so soon, Lydia,
purred Elmi as she locked arms against her daughter.
But really, fighting your own mother? And while 6 months pregnant? Surely that can't be good for the baby.
Like you know the first thing about parenthood, yelled Lydia in anger. Me and Cess, we were never your daughters, were we? Just the means to an end for you.
Naturally, as all children are.
Lydia's Nekomata form, I thought that was a typo for a second there. Lydia's Nekomata form erupted from within her, the claws sinking into Elmi's hands, the older cat girl laughing, even when the blade of Excalibur was thrust into her stomach and she faded away. Another Tulpa, confirmed Madrid, as she took hold of Lydia, who had been sent forward by the momentum after Tulpa Elmi's sudden disappearance. You gonna be alright, Lyd? Yeah, confirmed Lydia as she changed back to normal. I'm more worried about Hyoka, though. How do we calm her down? Leave that to me, came the voice of Junji. If anyone can get her to see reason, it's me. However, before he could approach his new bride, her head snapped around 180 degrees, and she began moving at high speed towards the far side of the park, where Lydia's keen eyes could just make out a small group of hooded individuals who appeared to be cowering now. I think we just found our cultists, Lydia declared before taking off like a shot after Hyoka, Junji not far behind. Meanwhile, the remaining tulpas had been taken care of by now, the Mountie being the last and most difficult of them all to defeat, oddly enough. All right, him being a tulpa might have had something to do with it, sighed Sarah, but I had no idea horses were so resilient. Tastes good too, replied Ray, crouching over a destroyed table as everyone stared at her.
Oh, what? I'm an Oni. We eat horses. Deal with it.
Anyway, has anyone seen Usako or Emmy?
No one had, but a cursory look around revealed the forms of the two sat nearby, a faint glow encompassing Usako's right half. Her friends made haste to get to her, and quickly realized the glow was Usako, using her own healing magic to slowly try and regenerate her own arm. The Pinkette was a lot better at healing others than she was herself, and the injury she sustained was incredibly severe in of itself. In fact, if it wasn't for her magic, it was likely Usako would probably have to have the arm amputated. In fact, thought Nonami grimly as she examined it closer, it may still need to be.
Where's Hyoka?
Groaned Usako, looking at Sarah.
I know she lost her cool when this happened, but I wasn't able to do anything to help her.
Sarah nodded grimly, laying a hand on Nonami's shoulder. Her expression was full of determination, as well as the kind of love only a mother could possess. Maria, I'm needed. My daughter needs me right now. Usako, anything you want me to tell her?
Just that we love her,
replied Usako.
I know it's sappy, but remind her that her friends are here for her. No, her family is here for her.
With that, Sarah rushed in the winter storm's direction as Usako cried out in pain and her magic glow fizzled.
Ah! I can't keep it up,
she moaned.
I'm using magic to keep up the healing, but also to numb the pain. I'm getting super low on energy. Dizzy.
Those didn't quite sound like pain moans. I'm sorry. She passed out from the strain, caught by Emiko before she could land on the slightly healed arm and make the situation any worse. Quickly, Nonami crafted a makeshift splint and gingerly tied it around Usako's arm. That will have to hold until we can get her proper medical care. Emiko, Ray, get her safely to HQ. I'm going to join Sarah. Godspeed. The two Oni picked up their fallen comrade, carrying her together as they shifted invisible, and took off, not of, as fast as they safely could manage towards HQ. Hyoka was in full Ice Queen mode now, and enraged almost beyond sanity. She had descended upon the cultists. Well, you know, cultist? The cultists so fast they hadn't had time to react, let along, apparently. I'm sorry, there's so many typos here. Let alone defend themselves, and they were now frozen tight to the ground, bound together in a mini iceberg, while their leader was being held by the neck in front of the Yukiona. Hyoka needed both hands in order to squeeze properly, and ice was already forming on the man's face and upper body. And he was clearly terrified at the concept of being frozen alive by this girl before him.
You gotta help me,
he pleaded to Lydia and Madrid as they approached cautiously. Hyoka's head snapped around over towards them.
Don't interfere,
she growled coldly.
If these idiots want fear, they can have it served ice cold. Ice to the core.
Hyoka, don't do it, warned Madrid. If you kill that man, we'll have to arrest you too. I don't want to do that. Neither does Lydia, and neither, I suspect, do you. Hyoka's grip just tightened as the ice crawled further along the man's body.
Hey! He cried out. I thought you were supposed to stop her.
It was Junji's turn to try next, though considering he looked just as upset as Hyoka, Lydia thought this might not be the best idea.
Hyoka, I know you're mad, and honestly, I am too. These sons of bitches ruined our wedding, and maybe you want to kill them for it. I get it. A part of me kinda does too. But this isn't like you. This isn't you. This isn't who you are, Hyoka Kaguri. The Hyoka I love, the Hyoka I married, couldn't bring herself to kill a spider that bit her. Are you going to tell me now that you're ready to kill this man? This time, Hyoka's expression changed a bit. She lost some of the rage, and even the winds died down a bit. Even still, she maintained a stranglehold on the cultist and wouldn't let go.
This was supposed to be my perfect day,
she declared, glaring icicle daggers into the man's eyes.
The one day I get to be the snow bride, the princess. But no, you and your friends have to come in and ruin it all.
Ugh.
And ruin it all.
And you will make it worse if you don't stop this at once, Hyoka. The voice belonged to Sarah, who had appeared beside Hyoka and laid a calming arm on her shoulder. This is supposed to be a day of celebration, and will be for as many years as the two of you have together. Do you really want to mar it worse than it's been already? Say you go through with it, Hyoka. And say you kill him. In an hour, I promise you'll regret it. This isn't who you are, Hyoka dear. I know that. You know that. Come on, be a good girl. For a moment, time seemed to stop as Hyoka continued to hold the man in her grip, but then...
Can I at least kick him? In the dick?
she asked as her hands fell to her sides and the cultist slumped to the ground in shock. The winds died down and the snow began to melt as the 80-degree temperatures quickly returned as the sun came back out. As hard as you like, smiled Sarah in relief. One yelp of pain later, and the cultists were being rounded up by Gardner personnel in special anti-touch gear to prevent any more tulpas being created today. Hyoka, still emotionally shaken up, was back in her human form and being held by Junji, who softly stroked her hair as her head rested in his lap. Thank you, Sarah, he smiled. I don't know what we'd have done without you. Thank you. Think nothing of it, she said softly, noticing the approach of Nonami. I'm glad to see all is well now, she whispered. Emiko and Ray just arrived at HQ and... things aren't looking good for Usako, I'm afraid. Usako was in the dream place again. Not out of the ordinary, but it was different. Everything was dark. Dark and distorted, like seeing the world through a heavy red filter. Try as she might, she couldn't change the scenery, or call out to anyone. Not her mom, not Kuriko. Hell, it didn't even look like Aramanes could hear her right now. What's going on here? She shouted in disbelief. Where am I? You're in my realm, Usako, purred an all too familiar voice, though Usako couldn't quite place it. You're on the right path, Usako. Keep learning the time magics, and eventually you'll be able to fix all of this. Your sister, your arm, whatever your heart desires. What? Demanded Usako as the place began to shudder, and she began to wake up. My arm? What do you mean? She would get no answer from the voice, as her mind shifted back into consciousness once more. Immediately, she knew something was wrong, but couldn't place what. She tried to reach up to her head with her right arm, but... What the hell happened to me? She screamed in abject horror, staring down at an empty sleeve on the medical gown she was wearing. It had been 2 days since Hyoka's wedding, and in that time, Usako had been put into a medically induced coma to alleviate the pain and swelling the injury was causing on her brain. She had been far more damaged in the fight than had been initially realized, and by the time they could finally operate on her, the arm was too far gone. Nothing could be done for it, and so the doctors had no choice but to remove everything from below the shoulder. All that remained was an aching nub where her arm used to be. Her torso was heavily bandaged as well, and she looked partially like a mummy laying there in the hospital bed. The sound of her scream brought in the nurse, as well as awoke Emiko, who had been asleep in a chair near the bed. "Uso-chan," whispered Emiko hoarsely, tears in her eyes.
I'm so sorry. Usuko was ashen-faced for a long moment, not reacting to anything. Her, her arm. She could almost still feel it, but it wasn't there. Her arm. The tulpa had taken it. Then a thought peeped into her mind. Chronomancy. She needed to practice turning the clock back anyway, right? Well, now she had an easy way of being able to tell. If she was able to reverse time for her arm and grow it back, if she could do that, rather, once she could do that, she'd know she was ready to revive Kuriko. This steeled her resolve, and she sat up as best she could manage.
Emi-chan,
she whispered to her girlfriend.
it's all gonna be okay. I freaked out because, well, who wouldn't? But I forgot. I can just grow it back with magic over time. It might take a little while, but yeah.
Emiko's expression softened, and she came over and placed both of her hands on Usuko's remaining one. I swear, I will never let this happen again, my love. I failed you once, and I shan't do so again as long as I live.
Geez, Emmy, it's okay. I'm not mad,
sighed Usuko, trying her best to smile.
This is... well, it sucks, but at least it's temporary. Hey, I know. Hand me my purse, will you? I made something a couple days before this all happened. I want to try it out.
Emiko nodded and went over to the hospital room's closet, pulling Usuko's black and pink purse out. While she did, Usuko took another glance around and realized something. They'd put her in the same room as Kuriko. Looking over at her sister, Usuko felt a familiar pang of sadness, but also one of hope. Soon, she knew, they'd be reunited and whole once more. It would just take some more time. Here you go, Uso-chan, said Emmy, placing the purse on the tray table next to Usuko. Would you like some help getting whatever it has out? Usuko nodded, telling Emmy to take out the small red vial. When she did, Emiko gave it a good stare. The vial itself was clear, though the fluid inside was a shade of crimson not too dissimilar to blood. In fact, the blue Oni asked if it was just that, to which Usuko replied.
Sorta. It's basically a real-life healing potion I brewed up. Uses a bit of vampire and Oni blood, plus a couple other things. Probably tastes terrible, but if I got it right, it should fix everything. Well, almost everything. Would you pour it in my mouth, Emmy?
Emiko uncorked the vial before slowly draining its contents into Usuko's mouth. The pinkette's face contorted in disgust, as the horrid tastes of blood mingled with lightning ash and ground bones. As the taste of blood mingled with lightning ash and ground bones into a truly nasty brew, but she managed to keep it together and swallowed every drop. The effects were immediate and manifold. She could feel her nibs ridding. Nibs. 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 Oh, I love doing these in one take. Nibs. I'm tweeting that later. And no one will know what it means until this goes live. Anyway, she could feel her ribs knitting back into their proper places. The swelling pressure she felt on her head, diminished to nothing, and even the crick in her back she'd had since Kaiju Island vanished without a trace. Sans her arm, Usuko was now back to full health and ready for answers only the cultists could provide. What she would soon discover, though, would only create more questions to plague her mind further. For while there seemed to be 10 tulpas present that day, those brought in were the only 9 cultists,
left in Fumizaki. And on that note, that's where we're going to end for now, because that is also the end of Book 5, Part 1. Or technically, this will be the third published book. But, you know, initially Book 5, so we're calling it Book 5. Nibs! I'm not over that. I'm sorry. That was perhaps one of the best flubs we've had yet. Hashtag Nibs. Get it trending, guys. Get it trending, Racomaniacs. Get it trending. That's KNIBS. Okay, but for real. Yeah, so it's kind of a all the humor from Nibs aside, we're kind of on a low. Uso's kind of at her lowest right now, you know? Down an arm, just comatose sister. Things are only gonna get worse before they get better. Assuming they do. But who knows? But for now, that's where we're gonna end things. Really don't have any info per se to add, so we're just gonna end it here. Hope you enjoyed. See you in part 4. And till next time, bye, Anara. Take care.